Good morning, everyone. This session will be about how you do the iOS app distribution process. For a start off, I think if you take the whole process, it's a bit straightforward. The only issue is that most clients don't give you access to do this. So in this, because of security reasons, either they themselves do it or their IT team does it. So because of that, we as developers don't always get access. So that's one limitation why we are not able to actually go through this process. So I'll explain the core concepts. I'll cover the core concepts so that you'll understand how it works. Once you understand how it works, you should be able to figure out or debug whenever there is an issue, because the underlying concept behind the app distribution, the signing process, when you understand the concepts behind it, it will be easier for you to understand how it works and so on. So if you have any questions in the middle, just please feel free to interrupt and ask. First, I'll introduce you to the core concept of this distribution process. So there are four entities you have to know about. The first one is the certificate. The second one is called the app ID. The app ID is a unique identifier for an application. So for example, say we are building an app, you need a unique name that distinguishes the app from the others, what we call the app ID. And for the app ID, we usually use this reverse domain methodology. So for example, if we are doing a for 1BT, say HR team, what we will do is we will say com.1billiontech.hr. So basically it goes as the reverse domain. So this is a standard, this is not a requirement per se, but this is how usually we do that. And then we have the third item, which is the UUID. UUID is a unique identifier for devices. This is not applicable for all forms of distribution, but Apple has this option where you can create builds where you can install it in particular devices. So say for example, you guys are in a single team developing an application and you want to create a build that can be installed by me only. What you guys have to do is you have to ask my UUID, then my devices use UUID, and you can create a build that can be installed in my device only. So that is an option, and this is not required for all forms of distribution, but just know about UUID. I'll just explain how it comes into the picture as we move along the presentation itself. And then the final concept is provisioning profile. Provisioning profile is the entity that kind of binds the certificate, app ID, and the UUID. It's just like an enclosure for all these. There are other information also in the provisioning profile, but conceptually you can visualize it as something that contains the certificate, the app ID, and the UUID if it's applicable. So if I repeat myself, the four concepts you need to remember is the certificate, app ID, UUID, and the provisioning. So when you're doing a build, you have two options. First one is you can either go for a development build or a distribution build. So a development build in simple terms is a build that you would install in your device, your test device, when you're doing your coding in Xcode, or say you're doing in React Native, you're doing a build and you want to test your build. So when you need something like that, what you do is you do a development build. And then the other type of build is the distribution build. Distribution builds are basically builds that you create to distribute. For example, if you want to send a build to App Store, what you do is you do a distribution build, right? So two types of build, the development build and the distribution build. And the process of creating these builds also slightly different, right? So if you are doing a development build, what you want is the development certificate. You need the app ID, you need the device list, the UUIDs, and you need a provisioning profile. So just keep in mind, if you are doing a development build, these four items you need. If you are doing a distribution build, means you want to send it to App Store, or you want to do a test flight build, even an ad hoc build, that channel of building is called the distribution build. So to do a distribution build, you need a distribution certificate, you need an app ID for it also, then you need the devices list. Devices list is something that's optional. For example, there's a building process called the ad hoc build. So the ad hoc builds, it's also a form of distribution. What it will do is, say for example, the development team does a build and wants to send that build to specific users. So maybe for a UAT, you need to send it to a particular user. In that case, there's this distribution form called the ad hoc distribution. You can do that ad hoc distribution, and for that, you need the unique devices list that you want to install the application. But if you're doing it for, say, test flight or a normal app distribution for general users, then this device list is not required in the distribution process. So remember, if it's a distribution type of build, then you need the devices list only if it's an ad hoc build. Right? And then again for this also you need the distribution provisioning profile, which is the entity that binds all of these three together. If it's not ad hoc build, it will have the distribution certificate and the Apple ID. So these are the main two tracks when you're creating a build. So if I summarize, you have the development track and the distribution track. So when you have to create a build, first you need to know whether this is a development build or a distribution build. And then once you know which track you are in, you need to have the correct certificate. That's if you are in the development track, you will need a development certificate. If you are in the distribution track, you will need a distribution certificate. And the next level is your app ID. So irrespective of development or distribution, you need an app ID. The third concept is devices list. If you're on the development mode, you need the devices list. In distribution mode, you essentially don't need the devices list unless that distribution is an ad hoc distribution. And the final one is if your provisioning profile. If you're on the development track, you need a development provision. If you're on the distribution track, you need a distribution provisioning profile. So in this step, what I'll try to show is how to create a certificate. So the certificate creation process is, there are a few steps you have to do it. The first step is you need to create a file called the CSR file. CSR file is a certificate signing request file, which you have to create in your machine. Say your lead wants to create a certificate, he will create a CSR file from his machine, and then he'll take that CSR file and upload it to the Apple developer portal. Now you have the CSR, you upload it to the Apple developer, and the Apple developer portal will give you the certificate. So those three steps are what are involved in creating a certificate. So how it happens is, this is the machine, say this is the lead's machine. He creates a certificate from his machine. He uploads that CSR file to the Apple portal. So this upload actually contains the public key, and the CSR file is signed with the private. So what happens is Apple will take this CSR file and then give you a certificate file. It will actually contain the public key. So one thing you have to notice that here we have only uploaded the CSR file along with the public. The private key is in this machine. The person who created the CSR file has the private key itself. So just keep that in mind. I'll explain why it's needed in the next slide. So I'll just quickly walk you through how you create the CSR file. You go to the keychain, right? Once you go to the keychain, you have an option called Certificate Assistant. In this, you have an option called Request a Certificate from a Certificate Authority, right? Once you click this, you have to give your details, right? I'll say Randika at brillianttech.com, right? Usually you save it to the disk. I'll just save it to downloads. So that's it. So if I go to downloads, I should have my CSR file, right? So this is the file that is needed to create the certificate. So this is the first step. Create a CSR file. I just created a CSR file, right? So once you create the CSR file, the next step is you have to upload the CSR file to the Apple developer portal. I'll use one of our accounts and then do it. So this is the Apple developer portal. So there are tabs on your left. You can see the certificates, identifiers, and devices. And then finally you have the profiles. So these are the four concepts I was talking about in the beginning of the presentation. So I'll go to the certificates, right? Certificates, you have to click this plus button, and then you have to select what type of certificate you want. Say Apple development, Apple distribution. So the first two I discussed. The rest is, I think, if you want, you can read and understand. But the first two are the most commonly used and the ones that you kind of have to know about. So you can select either Apple development or distribution based on what you're planning to do. In this case, I'll go ahead with development one because this is one of our clients' accounts. So you select Apple development, you click continue. Once you click continue, you have the option to load a CSR file or a certificate signing. So what I did was, on the last step, I created a CSR file. So what I'll do is I'll just choose that CSR file. This is the CSR file that we created. So I'll just say open or continue, and then it has basically created that CSR file. I have the option of downloading this CSR file. So once I download this CSR file, I should have the option of installing it. This is my CSR file on the downloads folder. I can double click it, and once I double click that, it will get installed on my keychain itself. So this is the certificate I created. So this is my name. This was created for development by me just now, right? So we did all the three processes here. We created the CSR file, we uploaded the CSR file to the developer portal, and we created the development certificate as the final step. So those three steps are done. I'll go to the next step about certificates. So the next key concept you have to remember about certificates is how to share certificates among developers. So as I said in this previous slide, the upload process, the uploading of the CSR file contains the public key but not the private. So what happens is, if you create a CSR file, so for example, I created this CSR file development.cert. So if I share this particular CSR, the certificate file with someone, the problem is that they will not have access to the private key itself, right? Because you didn't, in the process of uploading CSR file, there was no private key involved per se when you did the upload. So what happens is the CSR file itself is not the CSR file, the certificate file does not have anything about the private key, right? So normally this is an area where there is confusion, because people tend to create the certificate file, but sharing the certificate file itself is not sufficient for the Apple distribution process, right? So the problem is you need to have a way to share the private certificate or the private key also. For example, now if I go to keychain, this is the certificate I created, right? The first one. So it has the certificate, and this is the private key part. This is there because I created it. So there are other certificates that was not created by, for example, second, third one, fourth one, fifth one, sixth one. So these were not created by me. So I don't have the private certificate. So private key rather. So say for example, when you're sharing certificates, you should make sure that you send the private key along with the certificate. So since I created the certificate, if I want to export it, what I have to do is I have to right click here and export the Apple development Randika Swaris certificate. Right? When you click this, there are few options, right? First one is you can export it as a .cer. If you export it as a .cer file, what will happen is it will not contain any private key info. So you have to make sure that you export it as a .p12 file. When you export it as a p12 file, that is when someone else can use it. So remember, when you are asking for a certificate from someone, it should be a .p12 file. If it's a .cert file, what will happen is you will not be able to create builds using, because you don't have the private key alongside that .cert file. So remember, whenever you are asked to create a build, ask for the p12 file. Either you create the certificate the way I did it, or if you're getting a certificate from someone else, you have to make sure that you get the p12 file. If you don't have the p12 file, you can't really complete the signing the distribution process. So that's the key area where you kind of miss the distribution process, because you try to install the .cer file, but the .cer file does not contain the private key. Because of that, you are not able to create your builds from there. So that's the certificate part. And the next item was the app IDs itself. I'll show you how to do it. I won't create one. Here you can go to identifiers. So this is an identifier that's already being created, that was created earlier by us. Like that, we can also click the plus button and select app IDs and then continue. Assume that this is an application, and in this case you can say something like this. So you can give the name you want, and then you can select what are the options you want. It depends on the application that you are building, right? Based on the application you are building, you have to choose which features you want. Say, for example, you need the class character, things like that, app groups, things like that. You can select, and then you can add a description, and then basically you can go ahead and create the identifier. I won't actually go and create the identifier, but the process is very simple. You need to pick your app ID, then basically select the features that you will be using in this application, and then create the app ID. That's the second step. So the third step is the devices. So this is an optional. If it's required, you have to add it. You can just simply create there's a warning here. I think I have to go through this process. So the process here is also, it's simple. You just create the plus button, and then you can give a name to the device itself, and then give the identifier is the UUID of the device. And once you add it, it will be in the list, right? Third one is the other one, which is important. So the first one, second one, and the fourth one are the most important ones. The devices list only applies to certain kind of distribution, right? So here, try to create one if you can. So you can go and create a new profile. Let's try a development one. So in creating the development one, here we have to select which app ID that we want to create. So we'll select this one. We create continue, and then it asks us to select the certificate. So I just created a development certificate. This is the certificate that I just created. So I have the option to create the selected. If you want to integrate multiple certificates, that's also fine. There'll be multiples over here. So you can create the multiples. select the multiples and do continue. And then since I'm on the development track, it will ask which devices I want to install. So this won't be there if you're doing a distribution build. Say for example, you're doing an app store build. This option will not be there for the provisioning profile. I just select a few. I say continue. I'll name this as development U1 or something like that. And then I'll just generate this file. I can download it and install it, right? So once I download it and install it, you can get the Xcode itself. Let's go to Xcode also and then see if it's working or not. So this is one of our projects. So this has the same ID com.purelight audio.healer. Here you need to select the provisioning profile, right? So in the provisioning profile, you have this drop down. It will show which ones are eligible and which ones are not eligible. So for provisioning profile to be eligible, it will verify if the app ID is correct and if you have the right certificate. So those verifications, it will be Xcode itself will do for you. You can select this, and here in this case, you should be good to go because your development provisioning profile is shown as eligible. So probably I think we can't go beyond this because this project was upgrade from Xcode with 3 to 4, I guess. But that's the general rule of doing things. Hope you guys understand. If there's any issues, please let me know. But the core concept is basically, if I go back and reiterate, so just remember these 4 concepts: the certificate, the app ID, UUID, and the provisioning profile. The provisioning profile itself is the one that ties the certificate, app ID, and the UUID. So those are the core concepts that you need to remember when you are doing it. So if someone asks you to create a build, first you need to understand whether it's a development one or a distribution one. Once you understand that, you need to have the certificate. Certificate in the sense, if someone else created a certificate, you need to request for a P12 file, not the CER file. If you created the certificate, then no problem because you have the private key, the .cer file would do it for you. And then you need the app ID. Then if it's development, you'll need the UUIDs. And the final one is you need the provisioning profile. Once you have all these 4 sorted out, you should be able to create from Xcode itself. Yeah, I think that's it on the development process, the distribution process itself. All in all, just keep this slide maybe at your heart, and then you can just literally debug everything from this core slide itself, because if you can't build successfully, just go through this checklist. You have the right development certificate, you have the app ID, if you have the device list, if applicable, and then check if your provisioning profile is correct. If these 4 are correct, it should work. So whenever you can't create a build, just check these 4. You should be able to debug and come out of this. Thanks for your time, guys.